there, Marie Greene from Olive Knits here, and for today's Knitting Rescue 911, we're talking about the bind off and how to tell if your bind off is actually too loose. Now, we've talked about a tight bind off and how to make sure you're looking out for that, but sometimes we don't think about a bind off that is actually too loose and what problems we might run into. So I have done just a regular bind off here, but I did it really loose, looser than normal, and you can kind of see in that top stitch edge that those are pretty big. There's a lot of give here. So we've got a lot of stretch. And one of the things to look for in a bind off is to make sure that your bind off edge doesn't actually splay outward to appear wider than the rest of your knitting. When your bind off stitches are too wide for your work, and you can kind of see this demonstrated here, it actually pulls those edge stitches apart slightly and fans them out horizontally. So they start to kind of fan out to the sides, and you can see there's a little bit of extra space between the stitches in that last row because that bind off is so loose. This can happen too if you're trying to bind off maybe with a larger needle, because I've heard people talk about, hey, go up a needle size to bind off for that edge to make sure it's loose. But the problem is then you get more of this fanning effect. Also, you're going to find rolling. So even in ribbing, and this often happens if you're doing an offset rib. So instead of a 2x2, maybe you have a knit 3 purl 1 ribbing or something like that. If you're binding off too loosely, that ribbing edge might roll. So if you have finished a sweater and you've bound off on the bottom edge in ribbing, and that ribbing or whatever your edge is, if that edge is rolling and it's not supposed to, chances are your bind off is too loose. Now, I know we're so tempted to bind off loosely, especially on the bottom of a sweater, because we're afraid it's going to stick to us and we don't want it to stick around our hips or our midsection anywhere. And I get that. I'm the same way. But it is possible to go too far that other direction. So if you're binding off too loosely, that's not the look you want either, nor the fit that you want. You don't want it to roll up, and you don't want it to fan out that bottom few rows of stitches because your bind off edge is just too loose for your project. So when in doubt, double check, look at your edge and make sure that you're not getting that fanning effect. And if you're getting rolling or it's starting to kind of pull outward so it almost looks wider than the rest of your knitting, that's a sign you probably want to bind off just with a little more tension so it's not quite so loose. If you love learning new knitting tips and tricks, make sure to like and follow me here on YouTube so you will be the first to know when new videos are available.